Part 1.
You will hear a woman showing two people around a pool and gym. You have 30 seconds to read questions 1 to 4.
Good evening, I'm Louise and I'll be showing you the complex.
Nice to meet you, Louise. I'm Wei Wei.
And I'm Terry.
The tour takes 20 to 30 minutes. Do you have time?
Sure.
No problem.
We always like to ask people who come here for the first time how they found out about us.
We work on Albert Street, not far away.
So you saw our new sign?
I must say I love the blue dolphin. But in fact, I didn't notice it until this evening.
Did you read about us online? We've had some great reviews.
No, I didn't.
I'm afraid not.
So,
A woman at work comes here and she loves it. She swims every lunchtime. I'm hoping to join her.
in winter, midday classes are popular. Or were you thinking of swimming by yourself?
I'm not sure. Taking a class could be more motivating than doing laps on my own.
True. The number one reason people stop going to a pool or a gym is not the cost, nor even the time, but a lack of enthusiasm. They just run out of steam.
Speaking of steam, you've got a sauna here, haven't you?
Yes, we have. It's a great place to relax. But let's have a look at the main pool first. Recently renovated, this 8-lane, 25-metre pool is heated to 27 degrees Celsius.
Sounds nice.
The children's pool next door is even warmer at 31.
Charlie might like that, Wei Wei.
Does your son Charlie swim, Terry?
Actually, Charlie is not my son.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
It's a common mistake. We're from the same country and we work for the same company, but we're not a couple.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have 30 seconds to read questions 5 to 10.
Well, I've shown you everything.
It certainly is impressive. I think I could easily hang out and work out here.
So let's talk about membership.
I think I'll start with a weekly membership. I'm all too conscious of my limitations, and you're right about people giving up. I've done that before. I'd like to sign up for the water polo class between 12 and 1 and for the stroke correction class.
I teach stroke correction on Saturdays. You may find it's a struggle at first, but within a few lessons, your speed will really increase. Most swimmers have no idea that the way they use their arms affects their performance.
Do you also work on swimmers' legs? Mine are very weak.
That's for another class called kick correction. What about classes for Charlie?
Charlie's in a wheelchair at the moment. He's just had an operation. I see you've got wheelchair access through the parking lot and a ramp into the children's pool. He'll need both of those. Maybe once Charlie's comfortable in the water, we'll think about classes.
I do hope so. What about you, Terry?
I think I'll go for an annual membership. I'm moving into an apartment just 2 blocks away this weekend. First up, I'd like to take the Monday night weight training class in the gym. And I noticed your offer of a personal trainer for a 1-month trial. Once my personal trainer has developed a program for me, I'm sure I'll take some more classes.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. You will hear a man talking about plans to redevelop a wharf. Before you listen, you have 30 seconds to read questions 11 to 16.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming to this forum about the redevelopment of Queen's Wharf. I hope you've got some tea or coffee and you've put your phones on silent. Right. Essentially, we're now dealing with the final phase of the project. If you've looked at the plans, you'll have noticed that a couple of changes have been made to the previous ones, the most noticeable being the removal of accommodation. You may recall that the original developer went bankrupt. When Cato and Brown took the project over, they scaled things down. As a result, there are no apartments on the second floor of the wharf. In fact, there won't be a second floor at all. I'm sure a fair few of you will applaud this decision, since you thought you'd lose your harbour views. What else has been scrapped? Oh yes, the 4th jetty for water taxis. It seems the contract with Fletcher's Taxis has been amended so vessels can dock at any of the 3 jetties as long as no ferry is within 5 minutes of arrival. Depending on your feedback, there are some other features of the plan that Cato and Brown may yet dispense with. For instance, the canopy extension was highly controversial in the first consultation, and since the canopy doesn't go on until the very end, its size is yet to be determined. It has to cover the existing structure, but whether it goes out over the bus shelter is another matter. The length of the bus shelter has also been reviewed. As many members of the public pointed out, there are only 2 buses that connect to this wharf, so a long shelter isn't necessary. Years ago there was no shelter at all. People used to wait inside the wharf building. However, the owners of the commercial space complained. Bus passengers rarely bought anything more than a newspaper or a chocolate bar, and there were instances of shoplifting. The owners also got tired of children who rode their bicycles and skateboards up and down the corridor, even though it was forbidden, so this is one reason why the corridor is absent from the latest plan. Let's move on to what's set in stone, so to speak, things that the Council insists upon. Cato and Brown are adding a 3rd jetty for the new ferry service to Green Island. With a permanent community on the island, it's profitable to run a ferry. The Council hopes the wharf will generate much of its own income, so this 3rd jetty is not up for discussion. Likewise, renovation has to be done to parts of the wharf that no longer meet safety standards, like the weathered or rotten posts and planks. And the wooden eastern walkway will be almost entirely replaced.
Before you listen to the rest of the talk, you have 30 seconds to read questions 17 to 20.
Now I'd like to spend a few minutes outlining the redesign of the space inside the wharf building. Firstly, public comment was made during the initial planning phase, so the only input we're asking for now relates to the public space where there used to be a bookshop and a food outlet. Probably toilets will go there, along with seats, vending machines, plants and sculptures. We're hoping local artists will submit ideas for artworks and that the plants will be native. As you can see from the plan, the size of the internal space remains the same, but the corridor will be subsumed into the floor space of the public area and the Thai restaurant in Shop 4. Access to the shops will be external only, via the eastern and western walkways. I think the bicycle shop next to the cafe made a submission against external access, requesting the corridor be retained, but this was rejected. OK, let's have another drink while we discuss parking at the wharf.
The end of Part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a conversation between two students planning a research project. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 23. As you listen to the first part of the conversation, answer questions 21 to 23.
We'd better start planning our research project because we don't have much time left before it's due.
I know, only 3 more weeks.
Is that all? I thought we had more time than that. Well, let's get to work then.
Okay, so we agreed we're going to interview shoppers about their spending habits. Did we decide to conduct our interviews at the department store?
We haven't decided anything definitely yet, but I think the shopping mall would be a better place. We'd get more of a variety of shoppers there.
Yes, that's a good point. So let's do that. How many interviews did the professor say we had to complete?
She said at least 30. That sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
Yes, but if we divide it up between the two of us, that's just 15 each. That's not so bad.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 24 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 24 to 30.
Okay, so I guess we'd better start designing our questionnaire.
Well, we have to do some reading first, don't we? Didn't we say we were going to compare our results to the results of a government study?
Right, the government study about how the economic crisis has changed people's spending habits. We want to see if we get similar results.
Yes, so we'd better read that first and then design our questionnaire. Then I guess we'll be ready to go out and interview shoppers.
No, don't you remember? The professor said she had to approve our questionnaire first before we actually conducted the interviews.
Oh, right. So we'll get her approval and then conduct the interviews. I think it's Saturday would be the best day for the interviews because everyone's out shopping then.
Right. We'll do it on a Saturday then.
And let's also plan to get together the next day to analyse the results. It's best to do that while everything's fresh in our minds, don't you think?
Sure, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, so then we're going to have to present our results to the class. Do you have any ideas for that? It's an important part of our grade, so I think we should plan it well.
Well, I think the obvious thing is to prepare some charts showing our results and how they compare with the government study. That will help make the information a lot clearer to the class.
Right. Okay, so we'll draw up some charts of the results.
And then that's it. All that will be left to do is give the class presentation. Do you think we can be ready on time?
I sure hope so. Let's get started now.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a professor give a lecture on Louisa May Alcott. First, you have some time to look at the questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and complete the timeline in questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon. Today I'd like to continue our discussion of the lives of prominent American writers by talking about Louisa May Alcott, one of the best-known 19th century writers. Alcott is known for her moralistic girls' novels, but she was a much more serious individual than those novels might lead one to believe. She was born in 1832, the daughter of Bronson Alcott, who was one of the founders of the Transcendentalist movement. Bronson Alcott was a philosopher, but not a provider, and the family lived close to poverty. From an early age, Louisa was determined to find a way to improve her family's economic situation. As a teenager, she worked to support her family by taking on a variety of low-paying jobs, including teacher, seamstress, and household servant. Alcott also started writing when she was young. She wrote her first novel when she was just 17 years old, although it wasn't published until many years after her death. It was called The Inheritance. In 1861, the Civil War broke out. Alcott worked as a volunteer, sewing uniforms and bandages for soldiers. The following year, she enlisted as an Army nurse. She spent the war years in Washington, nursing wounded soldiers at a military hospital. While working at the hospital, she wrote many letters to her family at home in Massachusetts. After the war, she turned the letters into a book, which was published under the title Hospital Sketches. She also wrote numerous romantic stories, which she sold to magazines. Around this same time, she was offered the opportunity to travel to Europe as the companion to an invalid. When she returned home from Europe in 1866, she found her family still in financial difficulty and in need of money, so she went back to writing. Her big break came in 1868, with the publication of her first novel for girls, Little Women. The novel achieved instant success, and the public wanted more. From then on, Alcott supported herself and her family by writing novels for girls. It wasn't the writing she had dreamed of doing, but it earned her a good income. Alcott took care of her family for the rest of her life. In 1878, her youngest sister May got married. A year later, May died after giving birth to a daughter. Louisa Alcott raised her sister's orphaned child. In 1882, Bronson Alcott suffered a stroke. Soon after that, Louisa Alcott set up a house for him, her niece, her sister Anna, and Anna's 2 sons in Boston. Her mother was no longer living by this time. Alcott was still writing novels for girls, including 2 sequels to Little Women, Little Men and Joe's Boys. The latter was published in 1886. Louisa Alcott had suffered poor health ever since she contracted typhoid fever while working as a war nurse. She died in March of 1888, at the age of 55. She was buried in Concord, Massachusetts.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.